On July 3, 1989, another child was born in the municipality of Estreito in the state of Maranhão in Brazil. The boy was named by a common Portuguese name, Danilo. This child was not spoon-fed or stroked on the head with bedtime stories. He was not taken by the hand to school at school age. He grew up on the streets like all the children in this poor neighborhood. The environment for adults and children in Brazil's favelas is one of oppressive poverty, low living standards, and unemployment. All of these factors are the basis for street crime to thrive. When from childhood there is only dirt, poverty, lack of human conditions, and normal food, all existing instincts of self-preservation are activated. Everyone survives as they can or as they want. And unfortunately, more often than not, a person who from childhood has seen only violence and the speed of the result obtained by force will choose the same road of life because otherwise he does not know how. Our story today is about the horrific brutality and unwavering obsession that dooms people. In 2019, Sarah Brandão was excited to welcome her younger sister Deborah and 2 nephews, a boy named Ian and a girl named Yasmin, to the airport. After a failed relationship with the children's father, Deborah, 30, driven by a genuine desire and drive to provide a better life for her children, moved from Brazil to Pennsylvania to live with her sister. The family quickly settled into their new place, accustomed to the cozy home and new standard of living. Deborah Brandão and her sister Sarah were inseparable. Not only did they work together in the cleaning service, but they often talked on the phone during the day. They lived the quiet and happy life they had come to another country for. But an unexpected acquaintance changed the fates of all the heroes forever. In 2020, spending a day off with children in the park, Deborah met her compatriot, 31-year-old Danilo Cavalcante. A trusting relationship quickly developed between the young people. The man was very attentive to her and kind to her children. Deborah fell in love with her Brazilian neighbor Danilo Cavalcante and decided that she had met a suitable and trustworthy man. After a few months of their relationship, they rented a small house and began living as a full-fledged family. After a while, the hot and emotional Danilo began to get bored with the perfect family life. The closer their relationship with Deborah became, the more jealous and obsessive he became. Mistrust arising from nothing gradually turned into total control. Between the couple constantly began to erupt scandals, which ended in violence. Danilo got drunk every night and came home a completely different person. He was like an angry animal. From Deborah, he demanded complete submission and obedience, and in case of resistance, he punished her severely in front of the children. The woman was not weak. She defended herself as best she could and would not let her beloved children be harmed. Unwilling to tolerate such treatment, she returned to her sister's home, and after repeated threats, she went to the police and then to court to obtain an order of protection prohibiting Cavalcante from approaching her. Despite Deborah's numerous attempts to distance herself from Cavalcante, he pursued her fiercely, resorting to threats of violence if she dared to permanently sever the relationship. Fearing for her life, Deborah conducts a small investigation in search of answers about Danilo Cavalcante's identity. After contacting acquaintances in Brazil through social media, she finds information about Danilo's former life and the reasons for his entry into the United States. The woman realizes that her lover is not who he claims to be, and the received information throws her into shock. It turned out that on November 5, 2017, while in his native Brazil, Danilo Cavalcante fatally wounded 20-year-old student Walter Jr. Moreira dos Reis, shooting him 5 times near a restaurant in the city of Figueirópolis. An investigation revealed that the two were friends, and the killing was over Walter's car repair debt. A week after the crime, the Brazilian judicial system granted the prosecutor's office's request for preventive detention, issuing an arrest warrant. But Brazilian authorities did not have time to detain Danilo. Cavalcante was able to leave the country through Brasília International Airport because of a disagreement by the Tocantins judicial system, which did not request that the decision be registered in the National Warrant Registry until 7 months after the crime. Cavalcante entered Puerto Rico illegally. A warrant for his arrest was issued in Brazil in June 2018. After entering Puerto Rico, Cavalcante obtained a fake ID and eventually settled in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where his sister lived. After Danilo's true identity was revealed, Deborah gave him an ultimatum to either leave her alone or she would publicize his identity. This was the woman's fatal mistake. On the evening of April 18, 2021, Deborah was walking with her children in front of her house. The children were playing catch-up, and the woman was chatting quietly with an elderly neighbor. Danilo Cavalcante pulled her aside to talk. The neighbor remained waiting for Deborah and only watched the former lovers chatting. The conversation was calm, but at one point, Cavalcante pulled out 2 knives and suddenly attacked her. Deborah fell down, and he stabbed her several times. Deborah's children screamed all along the street for him not to touch their mom, but the man was in agony. He stabbed Deborah a total of 38 times. A neighbor who observed the brutal scene desperately tried to administer emergency aid and stop the bleeding. Deborah's daughter ran to the neighbor's house to ask for help and call emergency services. Deborah Brandão was taken to Paula Hospital, but eventually died from her injuries. Meanwhile, Danilo Cavalcante fled Pennsylvania to avoid arrest and was on the run for several hours until he was found and arrested by Virginia State Police. He was extradited to Pennsylvania, where he was placed under arrest, pending trial. On August 16, 2023, in Chester County, Danilo Cavalcante's trial for first-degree murder began. The investigation revealed that Cavalcante refused to accept the end of their relationship and had intimidated Deborah since 2020 with regular domestic violence. During Cavalcante's trial, Deborah's crying child testified, recalling over and over again the horrifying events of that bloody day. It took the jury only 15 minutes to reach a guilty verdict. Cavalcante was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the verdict was announced, Cavalcante was sent to the Chester County Jail in Pocopson, where he was awaiting transfer to a federal prison. But on August 31, 2023, at about 9 a.m., he escaped from the Chester County Jail using a chimney. Like a Spider-Man, he went up across the wall between 2 cramped hallways and so ascended through the chimney to the roof. Deftly bypassed the barbed wire fences and escaped. Surveillance footage showed the prisoner in the narrow space between 2 walls in the exercise yard. He put his arms and legs on either side and walked upwards. He then ran across the roof, climbed over the fence, and pushed through the barbed wire to freedom. Prison officials were very aware of all the vulnerabilities that had been identified in the prison after Igor Bolta's escape, and believed that they had been addressed. Officials believed that the barbed wire added after a similar escape by an inmate named Igor Bolta a few months earlier would prevent a jailbreak, said Acting Warden Howard Holland. According to court documents in May, an inmate named Igor Bolta climbed onto the roof of the jail and jumped to a less secure location. He was captured less than a mile from the prison about 5 minutes after escaping.
Again, the one thing we didn't take into account was the failure on the human factors side. We only focused on the physical infrastructure, not the human factor, Howard Holland said shortly after Cavalcante disappeared. Whoever was supposed to be monitoring the prison's 160 cells did not see the escape unfold, Holland said. A guard in a tower that overlooked the prisoners did not see Cavalcante slip away. The tower guard was first placed on administrative leave and then fired. As a matter of urgency, the prison was closed, and the search for a particularly dangerous criminal began. Alerts were everywhere. Danilo Cavalcante, age 33, black hair, possibly armed and very dangerous. The escape of a dangerous killer from state prison has gotten a lot of publicity. The search for the fugitive was broadcast daily on all media channels. The Pennsylvania State Police Chief, who led the search for Cavalcante, held regular press conferences and briefings, providing accurate information to state residents about the special operation. He urged residents not to stay on the sidelines, but to take an active role through vigilance and observation to help determine the perpetrator's route. And it worked. So, about a few hours after the escape, Danilo Cavalcante was spotted walking along a road about 2 miles west of the prison. With the help of reports from local residents, Cavalcante was spotted using a surveillance camera in the early morning hours of September 2nd. Police set up a search perimeter around the area, securing the roads and railroads that run through it to prevent Cavalcante's potential escape, and put up a $10,000 reward for any information leading to his capture. Authorities began searching within 2 miles of the jail in the heavily wooded area of Pocopson Township and Chester County. A local resident spotted the fugitive in a creek bed just days after the escape, but he fled into the woods before police could find him. The search continued. The search perimeter expanded after he spent about a week on the run. A security camera captured Cavalcante at Longwood Gardens, a popular botanical garden nearly 3 miles from the jail, just south of where law enforcement initially searched for him. There's a lot of ravines, a lot of high fields, a lot of grass, a lot of cover for a guy 5 feet tall and 120 pounds, Robert Clark, Deputy U.S. Marshal for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, said September 5th. In addition to the difficult, rugged terrain, searchers had a hard time coping with the extreme heat and humidity that stood for days. After a week of desperate searches for the fugitive felon, the number of officers involved in the search for Cavalcante on the ground has grown from 250 to nearly 400. "We have a large perimeter secured. We're very optimistic," the police chief said. The search team has been strengthened not only in numbers, but also in the equipment attached to the search. Helicopters flying over the search area began playing a recorded message from Cavalcante's Portuguese-speaking mother begging Cavalcante to surrender peacefully to authorities. The next morning, Cavalcante was spotted by a security camera on a property located about 2 miles south of the prison. Police moved in, set up a new perimeter around the facility, and Longwood Gardens, as well as schools in close proximity to the search area, will be closed while the search is conducted. Police continued an intensive search for the object for the rest of the week, and Longwood Gardens briefly reopened to limited access until forced to evacuate and close again after another sighting of the object on September 7th. That same day, police increased the reward for information leading to his capture from $10,000 to $20,000. After nearly a week of searching, nerves were on edge. Locals knew a man convicted of murder was on the loose, but authorities still hadn't told them how Cavalcante escaped from prison. Philadelphia residents in Chester County were asked by police to lock all doors and windows, secure vehicles, and stay indoors. CBS News reported 34-year-old Danilo Cavalcante escaped from a Pennsylvania prison.
The intense search continued until a major event on September 9th, when Cavalcante apparently broke through the search perimeter in Longwood Gardens when he was spotted on a video intercom call standing on the front porch of a former colleague's home near Phoenixville, nearly 20 miles northeast of the search perimeter. Cavalcante had a deft way of changing his appearance. He was shaved and dressed in new clothes. Danilo moved around the state with sophistication and managed to go undetected. So he stole a van from a local dairy store and drove it to Phoenixville, hoping to get help and shelter from acquaintances. On the morning of September 10th, a stolen van with an empty gas tank was found abandoned in a field in suburban East Mantmeal. The search area moved to the northern part of Chester County. The fugitive's movements again changed the search perimeter. On September 11th, as the search continued, Cavalcante was added to the Interpol list, and authorities increased the reward for information on his whereabouts. That same night, emergency services received a call from a local resident. He reported that a man similar in description had broken into the garage of his home. The homeowner was forced to open fire in self-defense and shot him 7 times. But Cavalcante was able to escape the home and steal a .22 caliber rifle with a scope and flashlight from the home. Police immediately arrived on the scene and found Cavalcante's sweatshirt and shoes in close proximity to the home. Once the identity of the perpetrator was confirmed and it was determined that the dangerous felon was now armed, police urged residents in the South Coventry neighborhood to lock all doors, windows, and vehicles and stay indoors if possible. The convicted felon is armed with a handgun and is particularly dangerous. Cavalcante's escape has alarmed many area residents. School districts canceled classes for the day after Cavalcante was spotted on surveillance video. Police expanded the search and urged residents to keep their doors locked. Police set up a new search perimeter in South Coventry Township that was tighter than previous ones, because they were certain Cavalcante was now surrounded. The search continued throughout the day on September 12th. Around 1 a.m. on September 13th, an aircraft with thermal imaging technology spotted Cavalcante in the woods. Despite the sighting, police had to wait until sunrise to approach due to inclement weather that prevented the surveillance plane from operating safely. The big breakthrough came in the early morning hours of September 13th, when authorities learned that a security alarm went off shortly after midnight within the final search perimeter. According to Bivens, an Office of Illicit Drug Enforcement aircraft using thermal imaging technology detected a heat signal in the area around 1 a.m. The alarm was triggered. "Technology really played a major role in this," said Ron Johnson, a retired Missouri State Highway Patrol captain. "Things went against law enforcement for a long time, but they paused in time and were able to pick up the heat signature from a DEA spy plane." Around 8 a.m. on September 13th, police found Cavalcante asleep with the rifle he had stolen from his home 2 nights earlier. Danilo Cavalcante, a dangerous criminal, attempted to escape by crawling into thick undergrowth, but a police dog named Yoda subdued him by biting his head and holding him until police arrived. Lieutenant Colonel George Bivens said at a news conference that Yoda caused Cavalcante minor head injuries during his capture. "They were able to land very quietly," Bivens said. "We have the element of surprise, and that allowed us to capture the fugitive without casualties." Cavalcante was questioned by police immediately after his capture, where he said he survived on watermelons and creek water, traveled only at night, and even once almost got caught by a police officer while hiding. Cavalcante planned to steal a car and travel to Canada. Since returning to prison, Cavalcante has been charged with multiple crimes related to his escape, including burglary, trespassing, and theft. Following the capture of high-risk felon Danilo Cavalcante, local and state officials, including Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, expressed gratitude to the many law enforcement officers who assisted in the search. Chester County District Attorney Deb Ryan stated, "Today is a great day here in Chester County. Our nightmare is finally over, and the good guys won. We are indebted to all first responders for their tireless and dedicated efforts to bring this fugitive to justice. They worked around the clock, and we are deeply grateful to them all." Chief George Bivens, who led the search, discussed the various challenges law enforcement officers had to overcome to find Cavalcante, noting the intense heat and thunderstorms that occurred in the area during the search, as well as the fact that each of the search perimeters established during the search were in heavily wooded areas. The search team consisted of approximately 500 law enforcement officers, including Pennsylvania State Police, FBI, ATF, and U.S. Marshals, who searched the area around the shooting scene. Police established a perimeter of several miles in each direction. Following Cavalcante's escape, the Chester County Jail Board, which oversees the Chester County Jail, was heavily criticized by residents in the area for failing to prevent Cavalcante's escape. Residents noted that the jail had the opportunity to make appropriate security improvements following Igor Bolte's May 19th escape attempt, and that those improvements could have potentially prevented Cavalcante's escape because he used the same method Bolte used to escape. The prison has already fired the prison guard who was on duty during Cavalcante's September 7th escape, with prison officials claiming that the guard had the opportunity to spot Cavalcante during the escape. Days after the offender's capture, the Chester County Jail announced that they had installed a tin roof over the area, where Cavalcante climbed up 2 walls to access the roof and escape, along with various other security measures and improvements. I think there are obviously questions that Chester County officials are going to have to answer as to how the suspect was able to escape, especially given the history of this prison, said Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. The communication, cooperation of all law enforcement agencies and local residents who came together during what has been such a long search for the state helped to catch and honorably punish the evil. Danilo will now never go free. Paula Andrea Salazar was born on September 6, 2015, in Venezuela. Her mother, Andrina Bermudos Milian, was from Maturina, Menegas. Her father, Leonardo Salazar, was from Tucupitu, a town in the state of Delta Amacuro. A year after Paula was born in September 2016, the couple decided to immigrate with their child to Ecuador. They were looking for a better life for themselves and their daughter, a month after moving to Quito, capital of Ecuador. Relationship in the family deteriorated for a number of reasons. Andrina decided to break up with Leonardo and soon moved to Cuenca, the third largest city in Ecuador. She took Paula with her. In Cuenca lived the mother of her best friend, who kindly offered to let her and the girl stay in the house while they found another place to live and work. Leonardo, the girl's father, given the breakup and other circumstances, decided to return to Venezuela, to his hometown of Tucupitu, and after a while immigrated again, this time to Trinidad, Tobago. At the time, Leonardo had already been disabled for a long time. The man's left arm had been completely disabled after an accident he had suffered while driving a motorcycle at a very young age. Since the man could not use his left arm, it was apparently difficult for him to find a good job even in Ecuador's capital city. After Andrina moved to Cuenca, she almost completely stopped communicating with Leonardo, only informing him once that she has taken a job on a farm in Tapacundo. A few months after separating from Leonardo, Andrina entered into a new romantic relationship with a man named Washington Andreas Aymaro. Andreas was a local Ecuadorian, and more importantly, he was the owner of the farm where Andrina worked. Leonard grew up in a wealthy family. When Paula was about a year and a half, Andrina moved to Anand together with Paula. Andreas and Andrina had a child together on April 7, 2019. With a newborn baby, family became happier and more united. However, everything changed when an event happened on March 27, 2020. It completely changed the lives of everyone involved. At the time, family was living well, enjoying every day, and things were going well on the farm. On one such day, as happy as it seemed, Andreas took Paula and by car went with her to the flower plantations. On the way there, girl got very sick. She became dizzy and began to vomit. Andreas had no choice but to stop at a public restroom. As soon as he and the girl entered it, Paula vomited again. He decided to leave her alone for a few minutes and went back to the car to find a change of clothes, since the girl's clothes were all dirty. When Andreas returned, he found Paula lying with her head in the toilet bowl, and the man immediately pulled the girl out, tried to give her first aid, and soon brought her to the hospital. When the 4-year-old girl was handed over to doctors, she no longer showed any signs of life. Doctors stated, Paula dead. After the doctors on duty performed an initial examination and assessed the girl's condition, they realized that the story Andreas told them was full of inconsistencies. For example, the doctors determined that the first glance that the girl had bruises on her body and face, the nature of which could not be attributed to the information her foster father told them. Medical protocol in such cases requires doctors to contact the police. Indeed, the situation itself suggested this. Shortly after the police arrived, Andreas was arrested as a suspect in Paula's murder. Although Andreas said Paula has drowned in the toilet bowl, the autopsy of the body revealed something much darker. First of all, the test showed that the girl had been dead for about 24 hours when she arrived at the hospital, which doesn't fit with the man's version of events. The girl's foster father claims that he gave Paula first aid and cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and that all happened just 20 minutes before he took her to the hospital. On the other hand, the autopsy found that the girl has several broken ribs, multiple microtraumas, a cracked spine, and sepsis, which caused her death. It became apparent that Paula's death was not an accident, as her small body has a significant number of both recent and old injuries. Leonardo Salazar, the girl's father, learned of Paula's death on March 30, 3 days after the events. His mother, who was still in Venezuela, had informed him of his daughter's death by the phone. She herself, in turn, learned it from Andrina's friend. It should be mentioned that after Leonardo has left Ecuador and Andrina had started a new relationship, she stopped all communication with him. That is why, for 3 days, Leonardo didn't know anything about her tragedy. until that time he could see her only through the pictures Andreina and his mutual friends had sent him. In addition, Andreina blocked Leonardo in all social media, preventing him from communicating with Paula. She also cut off communication with almost all of Leonardo's relatives. Andreina even turned almost all of their mutual friends against the girl's birth father, telling them about his lack of desire to communicate with Paula, and so Leonardo was able to learn of his daughter's death. However, Andreina's family informed him of an alternative cause of death. They told him that Paula died of complications caused by COVID. At the time, Ecuador, like the rest of the world, was under quarantine due to the pandemic. At the time, however, there were virtually no deaths from the coronavirus in the country. Leonardo was undoubtedly very suspicious that his daughter might have died from COVID, so he immediately began researching statistics on death from the virus in Ecuador. The statistics were posted on social media and news websites. Leonardo immediately noticed that there were no children among the few victims of the coronavirus in Ecuador. Leonardo's relatives helped him to investigate, and one of them soon sent him a newspaper article that mentioned the arrest of Andreas, who was suspected of killing Paula. Leonardo then began calling Andreina daily, and it wasn't until 10 days later that she decided to call him back herself. In that conversation, Andreina rather coldly informed Leonardo that Paula had died of COVID and that she could not give him more information because her lawyers had forbidden her to do so. The next step Leonardo took was to create a Facebook page together with an acquaintance of his dedicated to Paula, as well as an Instagram profile called Justice for Paula. The published posts caused a huge backlash across social media. Their main goal was to bring those responsible for his daughter's death to justice. On the same day that Andreina called Leonardo, she arrived at the morgue to begin dealing with her daughter's funeral, even though the prosecutor who worked on the case asked for more time to investigate the body. But the girl's funeral took place on April 10, 2020. Andreina simply did not allow a second autopsy to be performed on the girl. Thanks to the information posted on social media, Andreina's friends, people in her circle, contacted Leonardo and told him about the sad life Paula had in the years before her death. They sent Leonardo the information they had, most of which was based on isolated recordings of conversations, photos, audio recordings, and similar things. According to witnesses, ever since Paula's mother moved in with Andreas, girl had to endure abuse from her stepfather, as well as her own mother. Not only did Andrea allow her daughter to be treated this way, but she herself was directly involved in all of this. Everyone said that they only saw Paula happy and cheerful when she was playing alone, in the presence of her stepfather. The girl looked depressed, acted shy, and became suddenly very frightful. At one point, the little girl told people she knew that her mother and stepfather beat her because of she misbehaved. One day she even confessed that as punishment, Andreas pushed her and she hit her head on the wall. Paula called her stepfather nothing less than a monster and was undoubtedly very afraid of him. The little girl constantly had nightmares, and as a young child she already suffered from insomnia. The couple initially preferred that the girl, who was 2 years old at the time of moving into the stepfather's home, sleep alone. When falling asleep, she often cried, but no one paid any attention to her. In addition, her mother and stepfather forced her to tuck in on her own, without help. Moreover, her mother, Andreina, had been teaching her how to cook since she was 2 years old. This was something out of the realm of reason. Paula was forced to cook her own breakfast and dinners because her mother liked to sleep in the mornings and take a break from the baby on the evening. She simply didn't want to take care of her daughter. Not only that, Andreina was not bothered by the fact that the girl has to cope with baking oven by herself, despite the dangers. At the preschool, where mother had placed Paula, girl constantly complained of pain in her legs and back and often stated that she could not walk. Her constant complaints, as well as the bruises on her body, forced the teacher to show her to the doctors at the health center. After an examination, they concluded that the girl was being mistreated in the family. The girl's teachers then called the special police organization so they could investigate the girl's abuse in her family. Officials took up the case and decided to send the girl somewhere she could be safe while the investigation process was underway. As a result, on October 16, 2019, Paula was temporarily transferred to her uncle, Andreina's brother. A hearing on the case was set for December 4th, 2019. Unfortunately, the teachers who were supposed to testify never showed up. For whatever reason, they were unable to attend this hearing. As a result, it was decided to schedule a retrial for February 27, 2020. But even this time, Paula's teachers simply did not show up. The court was forced to dismiss all charges against Paula's parents, and then she was returned to her mother. Exactly 1 month later, on March 27, the girl died. And the exact reason the teachers did not want to attend either of the two hearings is still unknown. It is speculated that Andreina may have bribed the teachers or simply convinced them that, although the girl had some problems, the parents were not responsible for what their daughter said about them. After Paula's death, Andreas was placed in protective custody for the duration of the investigation, but he soon appealed this decision. As a result, a hearing was held on June 12, 2020, in which the judge set a restraining order and also determined that the man could be released to house arrest. But during the hearing, which was held via video conference, Andreas announced that he was dropping his appeal. At the time, Leonardo was still engaged in a social media campaign. He also asked his subscribers for financial support to be able to travel from Trinidad and Tobago to Ecuador. He wanted to file a complaint against Andreina, Paula's mother, before it was too late. At the time, Andreina had not yet been charged and was free. Fortunately, Leonardo was able to obtain sufficient financial aid as well as free legal advice from two Ecuadorian lawyers, Osvaldo and Alejandro, who unselfishly offered him support and assistance in the lawsuit. Leonardo had to cross the border between Trinidad and Venezuela. He had to risk his life, float on the raft, and then cross the entire border from Naturín to San Cristobal. He had to book private transfers since the pandemic had cancelled all services and he could not use the usual routes to get to Ecuador. Because of the pandemic situation, all maritime and land borders of Venezuela were closed, so only few regular flights to 4 or 5 countries could be counted in the following months. Once Leonardo arrived in the state of Táchira, he had to cross the border into Colombia over rugged terrain, dangerous in itself. He then took a bus to the town of Ipalerso and continued on through the hills and plains to the Rumichet Ridge, the border between Colombia and Ecuador. Then Leonardo took a cab and drove to Quito. On June 30, he had a meeting with a lawyer. Immediately upon arrival, father of a deceased girl filed a complaint against the ex-girlfriend to also be considered as a suspect in Paula's murder. On July 6, 2020, Andreas was indicted and the woman appeared in court, which stated that she should not be remained in custody and the house arrest would be sufficient and that she had to report to justice twice a week. As a result, both Andreas and Andreina were charged with murder. The maximum punishment for which in the Ecuadorian Penal Code was about 13 years in prison. In November 2020, the first hearing in the case was held. At the time, a specific date for the start of the trial was still to be announced. During the hearing, Leonardo's attorney spoke to their concern about Andreina's possible escape, as she had previously attempted to take her own life with pills. They also applied for Andreina to be fitted with an electronic monitoring bracelet. The judge decided to grant the lawyer's request and also reduced the number of days the suspect had to appear in court to once a week instead of 2. However, a few days later, Andreina demanded to reconsider the decision of the necessity of wearing an electronic bracelet. On November 16, another hearing was held to reconsider these decisions. Undoubtedly, all these details delayed the trial, but fortunately, the judge was able to set a date. It was set for December. The trial of Andreas and Andreina did not receive extensive media coverage. However, much of the information somehow made its way onto social media. And yet, because of the pandemic, which was a major topic in the information field, some of the facts went unreported. The trial began on January 14, 2021. At the time, there still wasn't any decision made about Andreina's alternative ways of imprisonment, and Andreas was held in the regional detention center. The trial was held behind closed doors, and no representative of the media was present. In addition, some of the participants connected to the hearing via video link. According to the doctor who performed the autopsy on the girl, Paula had nearly all of her spinal discs rebuilt, some of her ribs were broken, and some had already fused. This meant that the girl has broken ribs before, which had eventually healed on their own. She also had nail stigmata, a condition in which nails grow into the skin, bruises and scratches on her face and body, fluid accumulation in her lungs, scars on her head, and lacerations on her colon. According to the assessment, it was the later injuries that caused the infection to develop and gradually lead to sepsis, which ultimately caused death. The autopsy report also confirmed that by the time Paula was taken to the hospital by Andreas, she had been dead for about 24 hours. The amount of internal and external injuries reflected the level of cruelty to which the little girl had been subjected, as well as the level of carelessness shown by her guardians, who had never once taken her to the doctors. On top of this, the girl was malnourished, underweight, and too diminutive for her age, with mineral and nutritional deficiencies. Regarding Paula's injuries, Andreina, the girl's mother, tried to convince her family friends that the child has a lot of psychological problems, and that the consequence of these problems was a tendency to self-torture, through which Paula tried to attract attention to herself. According to the girl's mother, when her younger brother was born, Paula began to lack parental attention, stopped sleeping at night, and tried to manipulate everyone through crying. The trial also revealed that in October 2019, when Paula was supposed to remain in her uncle's custody, according to the board's decision, she actually continued to stay at her parents' house and only slept at her uncle's house for a few nights. In other words, the measures taken by the police organization did not have the desired effect. In turn, it was possible to establish that in 2017, only a few months after Leonardo's departure from Ecuador, the girl began to suffer from abuse. It most likely began immediately after Andreina enters into relationship with Andreas. The trial was attended by more than 40 witnesses of the accusing party, who were able to confirm the fact that Paula had to endure abuse for at least 3 years of her short life. At the last hearing, before the judge handed down the verdict, Andreina stated that she took sole responsibility for the child's abuse. The woman claimed that she herself had beaten Paula with a belt and at times with her fists. Through this statement, the girl's mother actually attempted to remove blame from her land. She said to Rekbeat that he was innocent, that he had nothing to do with it, and that he had never mistreated Paula. Andreina also stated that she chastised her daughter for causing her problems with her new husband. Breaking up with her new husband meant being back on the streets and losing the financial stability she could only have around this man. Taking care of her daughter was her last priority. After becoming acquainted with Paula's life situation, the judges were concerned about the couple's newborn son, but it's safe to say that this child, unlike Paula, was never abused. It must be said that Andreas has indeed chosen to exercise his right to remain silent and has never made any statement about the incident since his arrest. By the February 3rd, 2021, Paula's trial was finished and the couple was sentenced. Both defendants were found guilty of murdering the girl. The maximum sentence for this crime is 13 years. Leonardo's original attorneys and the accusing party demanded exactly the maximum punishment for the perpetrators, but the chief judge decided to take into account an aggravating factor, namely that Paula was only 4 years old, which means that she could not defend herself against her attackers. As a result, the judge sentenced Andreina and Andreas to 17 years and 4 months in prison. According to Ecuadorian law, the convicts have 3 days to appeal the verdict, so the couple was expected to appeal immediately. Even though Andreina was sentenced to 17 years and 4 months in prison, she still remained on house arrest and not went to jail. The fact is that the woman used her opportunity to appeal, so now the higher court needs to confirm her sentence for incarceration. In the meantime, the woman continues to comply with the measures that were originally taken. This is not the case with Andreas, as he was arrested at the time of his appearance at the hospital with the dead girl. Undoubtedly, the fact that Andrena is still at large is causing public indignation and anger. Most importantly, the anger of Leonardo, who is worried that the woman might take advantage of the situation to escape justice. This story unfolded in Washington, in Spokane, the state's second largest city. Situated along the river of the same name, it's the heart of the so-called inland Northwest. The city's name originates from the Spokane tribe, translating from the Salishan languages of the local Native Americans as children of the sun. However, in today's world, Spokane is notorious for its dichotomy. As beautiful and appealing as it is to tourists on the outside, it can be just as dangerous for its residents. According to state data, Spokane County has the highest crime rate in Washington, doubling the state's average. Law enforcement reports that a majority of local-level offenses are connected to domestic violence. And so, today's tale of a young Cinderella has a pretty exterior and a bitter taste within. The Holden family, a typical American household, had long resided in Spokane. They adored children, hence the home was always full of them. Judy and John Holden had 2 daughters and an adopted son, Joshua. The adult daughters had left the nest and lived independently for some time. However, their only son, Joshua, remained with his parents. The large, melancholic, and perpetually gloomy young man hadn't managed to start his own family and was thus reluctantly staying in his parental home. The care for children in this family was expressed in an unconventional manner. It began and ended with merely providing shelter. Judy and John didn't spoil their foster children with attention and care. All the foster children lived according to a strict schedule and were punished for misdeeds. The children became a small family enterprise. The desire to have a stable income in the form of significant benefits compelled the Holden family to take not just 1 or 2 children from the shelter. Judy had an educational background and had her own grown children with successful destinies. Hence, the guardianship authorities trusted the family and initially placed children with them for foster care, and then, upon mutual agreement, for adoption. Thus, one day, a sweet 4-year-old girl named Courtney appeared in the Holden family. Courtney Corin Holden was born on February 28, 1992, and ended up in the shelter 2 years later. Life in the shelter was not joyful for the girl, as it was for all children there. Every new day in the orphanage began with a prayer. Children of various ages dreamily prayed to the Almighty to give them a mom and dad, and one joyful day, the girl's wishes were fulfilled. Little Courtney went to Spokane. Courtney was just 4 years old when she first stepped into the Holden's home. She started living with Joshua and several other foster children. When the door closed behind her, the girl's dreams of a caring and loving family remained just dreams. If life in the shelter seemed sad and joyless to Courtney, at the Holdens, it turned into a real nightmare. From her early childhood, she was forced to do all kinds of housework. She had to clean the whole house, wash dishes for all the family members after every meal, and if she made a mistake, she was punished. What was especially surprising was that the Holdens treated the other foster children much better, and no one could understand the reason for their hatred of this pretty girl. Judy Holden was already of a considerable age by then, and Courtney became the last child they took from the orphanage. Perhaps it was in this that their inexplicable malice and hatred towards the girl was hidden. Courtney was even forbidden from going outside without permission. People who visited their home often heard Judy and Joshua mistreating Courtney, calling her Cinderella, as if she were a fairy tale character who, in real life, was a stepmother's and evil sister's slave. Courtney found herself in a similar role. However, the girl was very responsive, and over the years living with the Holdens, got used to the harsh conditions. She feared her foster mother, and her brother Joshua instilled terror in the girl with just his presence. He forbade her from socializing with peers. She had no mobile phone or other modern conveniences. She never left the house without necessity and permission. A breath of fresh air, as well as chatting with neighbors, was something she enjoyed only when the house was empty, stepping out into the backyard. Courtney's upbringing was under such conditions. Over time, she grew into an adult and simply got used to her life. She didn't become bitter, but always treated her foster parents with respect, as she knew no other life and had no concept of a normal family. Courtney gained a bit of freedom when Joshua, due to irreconcilable differences with the parents, moved to his sister's place for a considerable time. For Courtney, this was the happiest time of her life. She finally experienced the long-awaited taste of freedom, could freely leave the house, stroll, and meet with peers. Time passed. Courtney finished school and fell in love for the first time. Michael was a worthy partner for her. She felt care and attention from a man she had never received from anyone. After each meeting, Courtney was on cloud nine. Their relationship lasted until 2011 when they had a son. Desperately, Michael pleaded with his beloved to move in with him and live as a full family. But for some unknown reason, the young mother refused him and did not move, continuing to live in the despised Holden's house, and ended all romantic relations with Michael. By that time, the Holden house had become empty. The foster children had grown up and moved out. John Holden, Courtney's foster father, had passed away, so for a long time, she lived only with her foster mother Judy and her child. Michael was allowed to visit his son exclusively with the stepmother's permission. During the period when Courtney's brother Joshua was absent, their life with the little son was quite peaceful. But after the father's death in 2014, Joshua returned and began to fiercely terrorize the family home. He installed many surveillance cameras around their house on Hero Avenue, about a block from Rogers Middle School in northeast Spokane. Signs reading, "Smile, you're on camera," were scattered all over the yard, with several cameras pointing in different directions. The surveillance cameras made Courtney anxious again, as she knew venturing outside would bring trouble from Joshua for escaping. Courtney's life became unbearable once more. Around 2015, Courtney confided to a neighbor that she was once again not allowed to have a mobile phone, manage social media accounts, talk to anyone outside her family, drive a car, or even leave the house without Joshua's permission. The birth of her child had so embittered Joshua Holden that he forced the young woman to cease all contact with her son's father. Courtney silently complied. Neighbors noticed bruises on Courtney's face and arms, and when they inquired about their origin, she candidly admitted, "Joshua hits me." Concerned neighbors wondered why Courtney endured such treatment and tried in every way to help her. They contacted the police to draw attention to Courtney's plight, but the Holdens managed to quash the case each time, as the victim herself never openly admitted to being under family terror from her brother. Eventually, Courtney was deprived of the privilege of talking to neighbors, who since then only saw her outside in the evenings, as she was not allowed out during the day. Courtney silently obeyed again. No one knew Joshua like Courtney did. A tall, large, and overweight man, he possessed enormous physical strength and never held back in insults. Joshua's friends described him as a man with a paranoid disposition, cruel and unpredictable in nature. He once bragged publicly about his ability to easily end a life and dispose of the body without difficulty. He had a notable criminal record. In 2005, he was charged with assault and harassment, but due to a lack of evidence and the victim's unwillingness to cooperate with the police, he was released. He was also suspected of an assault and misconduct against a woman in 2003 when the perpetrator could not be identified. In 2006, Joshua was arrested for domestic violence against his mother and for burglary. These incidents prompted his flight from the parental home for several years. Upon his return, Joshua became even more ferocious. He installed cameras not just outside but also inside the house to keep complete control over Courtney. The young mother almost stopped communicating with friends, mentioning she was afraid to go anywhere for fear Joshua would find out and things would get worse. One person communicated with Courtney every day through Facebook until Joshua discovered she had an account. "I have to go. I must leave. Josh is coming," she said in her last message nearly 2 years ago. Then, her account went dark permanently. The dynamics within the Holden household were described by family acquaintances as peculiar. People familiar with the family were puzzled as to why Courtney's child referred to Judy as Mom and Joshua as Dad, while his biological mother was mentioned strictly by her first name. This led some to speculate that perhaps Joshua was indeed the child's father. Neighbors and acquaintances condemned the Holdens for their unusual lifestyle and antisocial behavior, opting to steer clear of their home. In August 2018, following yet another dispute, Courtney hastily packed her belongings into a suitcase and ran out onto the street. An irate Judy shouted after her, "Come back home," to which Courtney replied, "I won't stay here anymore." Moments later, an enraged Joshua, standing over 6 feet tall and weighing 300 pounds, forcibly lifted 160-pound Courtney and carried her back into the house. Judy slammed the door shut. According to a neighbor, she couldn't resist. This was the last time that this neighbor, and possibly anyone outside the household, saw Courtney. The young woman who had lived a life of invisibility remained so. It took almost 2 years before neighbors and acquaintances started to worry about her disappearance. In October 2019, a year and a half after she vanished, concern for Courtney Holden's whereabouts came from her child's father and his current girlfriend. They hadn't seen Courtney for almost 2 years, and the father was eager to see his child. The father of Courtney's son filed a missing person report with the police. On October 24th, the police, armed with a search warrant, went to the Holden residence and were surprised to find Courtney indeed not there. Neither Joshua nor Judy was willing to cooperate with the authorities. Courtney's stepmother allowed detectives to peek into her room, but then asked them to leave the house as soon as possible. Search dogs were even brought in, but to no avail. The Holdens claimed that Courtney had abandoned her son and ran away. They couldn't explain who could continue to cash the Social Security benefits deposited into her account or who was using the electronic food stamps. However, on the same day the search was conducted at the Holden home, Judy and Joshua withdrew the remaining $600 from Courtney's bank account. A coincidence occurred the next day when an unknown woman, claiming to be Courtney, called the National Center for Criminal Information in America. She stated she was safe and did not want to be searched for. Police traced the call and identified the woman as one of Courtney's stepsisters. Later, Joshua and Judy told many contradictory stories about Courtney's disappearance. Once they claimed she ran away with a truck driver, and in another version, it was a secret lover she had hidden from everyone. Courtney's absence and the constantly varying statements from those she lived with made the Holdens suspect. Clearly having something to hide, Joshua and Judy Holden hastily left Spokane by the end of October 2019. Their flight only convinced detectives of their involvement in Courtney's disappearance. The Holdens were tracked down in Texas at the home of one of Judy's adopted daughters. Authorities were able to charge them with cashing benefits intended for Courtney, as well as with identity theft, which allowed for their arrest and detention in a Texas jail. The Spokane Police Department attempted a welfare check on Courtney in early October, but it quickly turned into a missing person case handed over to Major Crimes Detective Randy Lesser. Lesser spoke with the Spokesman Review about the investigation after the search warrants he filed in the Spokane County Superior Court became public. This report on Courtney's disappearance and the investigation is based on police interviews and court records. Courtney was officially declared missing. Alerts were sent to all states, and several news broadcasts featured the missing person case, initiating an extensive search for her. When patrol officers and detectives visited the home for various reasons, Joshua and Judy Holden refused to cooperate with the investigation, an unusual behavior when it comes to welfare checks and missing persons cases. On the day Courtney was declared missing, a woman claiming to be her called Crime Check to say she was fine. The police dispatcher also spoke with the woman claiming to be Courtney. Later, it was discovered that it was actually Courtney's sister, who did not tell Lesser why she had impersonated her, presumably to deflect suspicion from Judy and halt the search efforts. "I'm concerned that she might potentially be deceased," Lesser said in an interview with the Spokesman Review. Lesser expressed particular concern about Joshua's history of violence. Joshua had been charged with assault in the past, but the case was dropped shortly before trial when the victim ceased cooperating with the prosecution. Investigators were in the process of obtaining DNA evidence, and court documents from that case indicated that Holden was suspected in another assault back in 2003. Neighbors and family described Joshua as unstable, cruel, and diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. A neighbor mentioned that Joshua was unemployed and Judy feared him. Joshua had also been arrested on charges related to unlawful imprisonment and domestic violence, and he had been convicted of burglary. Family members said that Joshua and Judy boasted to them about knowing ways to evade the police, and Joshua made comments about how easy it would be to end someone's life and hide the body. People don't just disappear, especially when they have a child, Lesser remarked. Court documents stated that Courtney was a loving mother who would never abandon her child. Over the 1.5 years Courtney was not seen outside her home, Joshua and Judy told neighbors and family she was traveling with a boyfriend, an unnamed truck driver nobody met. Sometimes rumors circulated that she had run off with a fiancé. Other times, she was supposedly just inside the house but unavailable for visits. Judy told Lesser that Courtney had been home just a few days before when he knocked on their door in early October. She said Courtney left on foot with her son. When Lesser asked for Judy's phone number, she locked the door in his face, according to court documents. She then reluctantly allowed the police inside to see Courtney's room. She became very nervous, said Lesser. The house was extremely cluttered, with piles of items covering all available space on counters, Lesser wrote in the court documents. Courtney's room was also cluttered, and the mattress was bare. It appeared as though no one had lived there, Lesser observed. At one point, Judy panicked upon losing sight of one of the detectives behind a closed door. She ordered the investigators to leave when Lesser asked to check the rest of the house for Courtney's child. Later that day, a neighbor told Lesser they saw Joshua, Judy, and one of Courtney's sisters leaving in a van with a child. Detective Lesser also found it suspicious that Courtney, who suffered from a chronic illness, had not seen a doctor since October 2017. She received her last prescription in July 2018, though she had been getting medications every month before disappearing. Despite the gap in medical records, money continued to be withdrawn from Courtney's bank account every month, and her EBT card was used for grocery shopping. Surveillance footage confirmed Joshua and Judy shopping with a small child. Cameras also recorded the couple withdrawing the remaining money from Courtney's bank account on the day she was declared missing in early October. By October 24th, Joshua and Judy had left their home. Lesser wrote that the DVR from the home surveillance system had been removed, and the family's 6 pets were gone when police arrived to execute the search warrant. Mobile numbers associated with Joshua and Judy were deactivated in mid-November, but 2 new numbers on the account were activated on the same day with Texas area codes. About a month after the Holdens left, a neighbor called the police to report activity at the house. It was one of Judy's daughters and her husband who had flown in from Texas to check on the property. They said they hadn't seen Courtney for 2 years and that Judy had retired. The man told the police that Joshua and Judy had a child, but Judy's daughter stated the child was Courtney's. In mid-December, Lesser traveled to Texas in search of Joshua and Judy. The police found them at Judy's daughter's house, along with Courtney's son. Joshua and Judy Holden were arrested on charges of identity theft, interference with custody, and for using Courtney's bank accounts and concealing her child. The child was found safe and was successfully returned to his father. No criminal charges were made against other family members. The police searched Judy's Spokane home with search dogs, but unfortunately found no trace of Courtney. Searches of the home in Texas also yielded no clues to Courtney's whereabouts. Officers also searched a vehicle and trailer owned by Judy, parked at an RV lot in Oklahoma. 40-year-old Joshua and 74-year-old Judy were in jail in Texas, where they declined to be interviewed by the police. They refused to be extradited to Spokane, so the police awaited a governor's warrant for their return. Since the police could not prove their involvement in Courtney's disappearance, they were likely released. This is probably one of the deepest missing person cases, Lesser said about the months-long investigation. I have 4 notebooks full of different information. Judy and Joshua still claim they have nothing to do with Courtney's disappearance, while the police believe she is likely deceased, but unfortunately cannot yet prove it. Domestic violence experts point out several factors why cases like Courtney Holden's are not always reported. One is the social assumption that someone else will take care of it, according to Morgan Colburn, the Director of Counseling, Advocacy, and Outreach at YWCA. Colburn mentioned that fear of retaliation could also be a factor. And sometimes people see it as a family matter, something that needs to be dealt with at home, he said. Despite the aforementioned charges, Judy and Joshua have not been charged with anything directly related to Courtney's disappearance. Many still believe they know what happened to Courtney. In addition to Joshua's known aggressive behavior, he had also stated he could end someone's life and successfully hide the body from the police. Investigators believe Courtney is deceased, but they have not made any arrests related to her case yet. Summing up today's story, it's heartbreakingly clear that Courtney was unfortunate to become part of the Holden family. And this young girl, who dreamed of family and love, lacked the courage to stand up for herself. She wholeheartedly believed that even these people, who yelled at her, mistreated her, and forced her to work for them, were her family. But should one really need to defend themselves from their own family? It's a profound regret that the bold claims made by Joshua Holden in public about being able to end a life and hide a body cannot be used as evidence of his involvement in Courtney's disappearance. Especially since after that fateful evening, when he forcefully took her back into the house, she was never seen again, and no one knows what she had to endure in those dreadful moments and what atrocities were committed behind closed doors by these monsters who called themselves parents. There are countless ways to discreetly dispose of a body using various chemicals that neither experts can identify nor police dogs can detect. This suggests that if Courtney was harmed that evening, her spirit still lingers in the Holden estate, where she sought a family, but found her demise instead. Her young son was removed from the Holden household and placed under the care of his father, where he remains to this day. Courtney Holden is still listed as missing. If you have any information that could aid the investigation, please contact the Spokane Police Department.